Hey, world history. Welcome to U2-L5 New Kingdom. So, the New Kingdom lasted between 1550 to 1069 BCE. So, your job today, you're going to watch this Ed puzzle. You're going to answer the questions on the Ed puzzle. Any question that I ask you in blue text is going to be a question I want you to answer directly on the Ed puzzle. Make sure you're also following along with your study guide. Important concepts on the study guide will be in red text. And of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. I am here to help you out. So, learning targets describe the development, characteristic, and decline of civilizations in Egypt and develop understanding of the New Kingdom era. So, before we dive into the New Kingdom, there's just a few things about ancient Egypt that I didn't get to talk about beforehand that might pop up when you're researching a pharaoh for your Unit 2 summative. So, I want to go through some of those. The first thing would be gnomes. Now, when you hear the word gnomes, you probably think of like the garden gnomes, right? Yeah, no, that's not the kind of gnomes that I'm talking about. So gnomes were kind of like states in ancient Egypt. So, right, like today in the United States, we have states like Texas and Wisconsin and Minnesota that are kind of governed by themselves, but we're still a part of the United States. So, kind of the same thing with gnomes. So, these are all these little regions, but they were still ruled by the big, like, pharaohs of Egypt. So gnomes were territories ruled by a nomarch, and they would report directly to the pharaoh. Now, the pharaoh would be located here in Memphis. Nomarchs were typically chosen by a pharaoh, or they were hereditary, so it was passed from father to son. And there were 42 gnomes total. Now, there's more gnomes as you go down the river, but these are some of the most populated gnomes during ancient Egypt. Another thing that might pop up while you're researching is something called a delta. So there are deltas around the world, and that is just where a river meets the ocean. There is a buildup of sediment where the ocean, the river kind of collide. You can see up here, here's a map of what the delta looks like on the Nile. So this is the Mediterranean up here. And then here's the Nile River kind of branching off. And then here is a real life picture of what a delta looks like. So typically the water is super slow moving in that area, and it creates a wetland. Other things that might pop up during your research would be religious cults. So when I talk about religious cults in ancient Egypt, I'm not talking about like what we think of cults today. So like cults today, we think about like brainwashing and on like reality TV and stuff like that. In ancient times, that wasn't really the case. So it's not necessarily the brainwashing cults like we think of today. So they were groups of people who worship the same god at a temple. That's what a cult means. There was usually one main religious cult in a city. So each city would be dedicated to a certain god. And during cult meetings, they would sacrifice animals and do worship stuff. Valley of the Kings. So this also might pop up while you're researching pharaohs because there was a lot of pharaohs that were buried here. So the Valley of the Kings is, well, kind of what it's called. It is a valley on the Nile River, so it's located right here. It was used during the New Kingdom period, which we'll talk about today. And what it is, it's a bunch of tombs carved out of rocks in the cliff's edge of the valley. So, for example, right here, you can see a big cliff. This is one of the most famous tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And you can see that there's big monuments and statues carved out from the rock. So far, there is 63 tombs discovered in the Valley of the Kings. And this includes one of the most famous, Tutankhamun, or King Tut. We will talk about him in just a few minutes. All right. And then this other word might pop up while you're doing research for your Unit 2 summative, and that is Hyksos. So the Hyksos are one of the great mysteries in history. So between the Middle and the New Kingdom is when the Hyksos appear in ancient Egypt. So the time period between the Middle and the New Kingdom is called the Second Intermediate period. which was from 1700 to 1550 BCE. Now, the Hyksos were a group of people who conquered Upper and Lower Egypt. Okay? The weird part of them is that no historian knows who the Hyksos were, where they came from, what language they had, nothing. Historians know nothing about these people who came in and conquered Egypt. I know, crazy. But when they did conquer Egypt, they adopted all of the Egyptian culture, including gods, language, writing, government, clothes, all of those things. So they are a great mystery to historians. So now let's talk about some New Kingdom stuff. So historians know the most historical information about the New Kingdom than any other ancient Egyptian time periods. So here's a question for you. Why do you think that is? Now just take your best guess. You don't need to Google. So the answer to that is because during the New Kingdom, that's where the most famous pharaohs lived. So there's a lot more pressure for historians to focus on researching these pharaohs. There's also very famous monuments with inscriptions. Egypt is at its wealthiest point, which means that there's more trade among the regions and there is more trade records. Now, going back to this slide here, this is one of the things I like to show y'all. So in ancient Egypt, there's these things called obelisks. There's these like really tall, like pointy tower thingies, and they typically have inscriptions on them. Now, if you're like, wait a minute, I feel like I've seen that somewhere in the United States. Yeah, if you ever seen pictures of Washington, D.C., or you've been to Washington, D.C., which is cool, I have not gone there, but you will also see an obelisk. So the Washington Monument, that is an obelisk, and it's taken directly from the influence of ancient Egypt. All right, so now I'm going to talk about this one dude, because this one dude has a crazy life. So his name is Amenhotep IV, but he later changed his name to Akhenaten. So they both mean the same dude, okay? Both these names are just this one dude here. So he ruled from 1352 until 1336 BCE in ancient Egypt. Now, when you are doing research, you might come across a date and you'll see a lowercase r with a period. And you're like, what the heck does that mean? So if you ever see a lowercase r with a period, that means that this is the time that that person ruled. Okay? So in this case, Akhenaten, he ruled from 1352 until 1336. He was originally named Amenhotep IV, but he changed his name to Akhenaten after becoming pharaoh, and I will tell you why in just a few slides. So he became pharaoh after his father, Amenhotep III, died. So Akhenaten is one of the most influential and odd pharaohs in the history of ancient Egypt. So before we get to him, just a little bit more background information. So prior to his rule, there were a vast amount of gods that were worshipped in ancient Egypt. Here are some of the most popular. So we have Amun, who is the god of air. He is by far the most popular god worshipped in ancient Egypt. After that, you have Osiris, who is the god of the underworld. You have Isis, who is the goddess of fertility and life. Horus, who is the god of the sky. Ta, who is the craftsmanship god. And Seth, who is the god of chaos. Although these were the most popular gods to worship, Akhenaten outlawed all of them, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So there's this sun god. This sun god's name was Aten. So here's the depiction of the sun god in Egyptian art. So Aten, he was around for ancient Egypt for quite a few hundred years, but he wasn't super popular of a god. Not a lot of people worshipped him. But when Akhenaten came to power, he only worshipped this one god, Aten. So he loved Aten so much that when he changed his name, he put Aten at the end of his name. right? So originally his name was Amenhotep IV, and he changed his name to Akhenaten, and he loved Aten so much that he put Aten in his name. That's how much this dude loved this god Aten. So not only did he worship only Aten, he also made all of the other cults illegal. So all of these other gods, no one could worship them anymore. It was illegal. So Egypt became a monotheistic society during his reign. And he was so strict about this that Akhenaten actually sent back priests of the other gods to school to get re-educated so they could only worship Aten. So like I said, priests of other gods were sent back to school. They were re-educated on what they could and could not teach. Akhenaten also hated Amun, who was the god of air, so much that he ordered all statues and all pictures having Amun's face or name to be destroyed. So, for example, here on this inscription, so right here would have been Amun's name, and Akhenaten hated that so much that he ordered someone to chip away the name so no one could read it anymore. He also moved the capital of Egypt from the city of Memphis to a new city called Akhenaten. I know, it's really confusing because it's like the exact same spelling as his actual name, except for instead of an N, there's a T. Yeah, this dude was pretty insane. So here is the city of Memphis, and he moved the city of Memphis to Akhenaten, which was the city right down here. So here's another question. How do you think priests and common people felt about Akhenaten making all other gods illegal? Yeah, they're going to be probably pretty mad about that. All right, so some more things about Akhenaten. So he married Queen Nefertiti, who you can see a bust of her here. She's also in this inscription right here. So the really interesting thing that Akhenaten did is that instead of like having the queen be inferior to him, they actually co-ruled Egypt together. Together, they also had 6 daughters, and he also changed the art form in all of Egypt. So we're going to do kind of a before and after about Egyptian art. So here are 2 examples of Egyptian art before Akhenaten took power. So I want you to just pause for a moment, take a look at all of this. All right. And then once Akhenaten took power, this is what artwork looked like. So we'll pause for a moment and take a look. So here's another question for you. What do you notice between the before and after pictures? Yeah, there's some pretty big differences. So artwork under Akhenaten became very non-masculine. So as you saw before, you saw a lot of muscles. You saw like more of like a like square facial structure. So under Akhenaten, all those things went away. It was very non-masculine. Feminine curves were added on to males. He was also very often depicted with his queen Nefertiti. He was also shown in inscriptions of kissing and being affectionate towards his kids and wife, which you can see back in this one here. So you can see that he's holding one of his daughters and giving like a kiss on the face or something like that. And also he only worshipped Aten, so you'll see Aten in a lot of the artwork. So here's another good question. What do you think the pharaohs after Amenhotep IV / Akhenaten thought about his art style and monotheism? Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second here. So let's go on to the next pharaoh who was after Akhenaten. So the pharaoh that was directly after Akhenaten was Tutankhamun, also known as King Tut. He is probably the most famous pharaoh in modern day, not for what he did during his reign, but for his tomb. So he ruled from 1332 until 1323, which was right after Akhenaten. He married one of Akhenaten's daughter. There's kind of a debate in the historians of if he's actually Akhenaten's son as well, or if he's the son of one of Akhenaten's sisters. That's a big historical debate, but um, he's somewhat related to Akhenaten, but no historian knows exactly what. He also died in his early adulthood, so he was only 18 or 19 years old. So why is Tutankhamun so famous? Yeah, so he's so famous because his tomb was not robbed by grave robbers. So we talked about that back in the Old Kingdom of how a lot of those pyramids and tombs got robbed a lot. This one was perfectly intact. And it was discovered back in 1922. Tutankhamun was also very displeased with his father-in-law, Akhenaten. He hated all of Akhenaten's like art style changes and religious changes. So he returned to the old art style of ancient Egypt. So no more like feminine curves. He also returned to polytheism. So anyone could worship any of the gods. And he also didn't mention Akhenaten in his grave inscriptions, which is like a huge slap in the face. So here's a picture of what King Tutankhamun's tomb looked like. All right, let's wrap this up. So today we learned about characteristics of the New Kingdom, Gnomes, Valley of the King, Hyksos, Amenhotep IV slash Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun. Now, next up, you're going to do U2-L6, Judaism Explained. After that, you're going to do U2-L7, Ancient Egypt Video Choice. And then after that, you're going to do a Unit 2 summative, which is the Pharaoh Project. And I'm going to explain to you what that project is right now. So when you go into the Schoology page, you're going to go into Unit 2, which you probably are already in because you're watching this video now. You're going to go into the Week 2 folder that I will have published on Monday. And you will see down here there's a bunch of different documents. So like I just explained, next week you're going to do U2-L6, Judaism Explained. After that, you're going to do U2-L7, Ancient Egypt Video Choice. And then after that, you're going to get started on the Unit 2 summative. So instead of a multiple choice test like we had for Unit 1, Unit 2 is a project. So when it comes to this class, I typically kind of bounce back and forth between having just like a normal test and doing some sort of like summative project. This is one of the units that you do a summative project. Now, for directions, you're going to click this link here that says Unit 2 summative directions. This will take you to this document here, okay? So I'm going to walk you through these steps so we all are on the same page. So step 1, below is a list of pharaohs from ancient Egypt. Pick any pharaoh on the list to do for your Unit 2 summative. The only exceptions are Akhenaten and Tutankhamun because I already talked about those. Some pharaohs have a ton of information on them. Some pharaohs, historians really just only know their name. Pick a pharaoh that will give you enough information to complete the slideshow. If you're having trouble finding resources and information about a pharaoh, please let me know. I will certainly help you. So step 2 is you're going to open up your Unit 2 summative template on Schoology. So on each of the slides, there will be speaker notes located at the bottom of each slide. You need to expand the speaker note box from the bottom, and you will see that I've included what questions/prompts you need to answer for each of the individual slides. So I'm going to do that right now. So going back to the Schoology page, you're going to see that you have a Unit 2 summative template. You are going to click on that. That is going to bring you to this slideshow here. So this slideshow is what you're going to do your Unit 2 summative on. So the first slide, you need to put your name of your pharaoh and also your name. And then after that, you need to fill out these slideshows. And you're probably like, wait a minute, where are the questions? I don't understand. Ah, that's right. What you need to do is you need to go down to the bottom here. There's a little line. You're going to drag that up, and look at that. All the questions you need to answer are going to be in the speaker notes down here. Okay? All right, let's go back to the directions. Step 3. Research your pharaoh and collect information about your pharaoh that will help you answer the question on each slide. You may not use AI as a source for your research for this project. Look for credible sources. Wikipedia is okay to use for this project. Typically, there's not a lot of information about ancient Egyptian pharaohs, and Wikipedia typically has the most information, so I'm okay with you using Wikipedia for this particular summative. Step 4, fill out the slideshow template by answering the questions using the information you have gathered. Make sure that there is at least one picture per slide pertaining to your pharaoh. Also, make sure you include the website you got the picture from. Okay? And then step 5, once you're done filling out your slideshow, double check that you answered all the questions in the prompts. And then step 6 would be to submit it to Schoology. I also have the link to the rubric here. Also, I have an example that I did. So I did an example on Tutankhamun. So if you're kind of like, I don't quite know how I want to format things, take a look at my example. Okay, it's I pretty much hit all the marks. I did. Yes. Okay. So also some things to note is that there may be more than one way to spell an Egyptian name. So I may have spelled it one way on this list, but Britannica might spell it another way. And also note that the pharaohs in green text are pharaohs with lots of information about them, so they're easier to research. So right here is the start of the list of Egyptian pharaohs. So you can see there's a lot of names. Yeah, a ton. So the ones that are in green text, like this and down here, those are pharaohs that already are that I know have a lot of information. So if research is not like a real big skill of yours, I really suggest that you look at the pharaohs with the green text because they're going to have a lot of information about them. Okay? Awesome. All right, so that's the Unit 2 summative. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. I am so happy to help you out. Ancient Egypt is my jam. I love it. So please reach out with any questions. And yeah, happy researching. Bye.